Okay, so we're diving into feudal Japan today. Specifically, the critical response to the new Assassin's Creed Shadows.
Sounds good.
Our listeners are really curious about this one.
Yeah.
They've sent us a ton of reviews and summaries from a bunch of different experts.
Right.
And like always, we're going to try to cut through the noise and see what we can learn.
Love it.
So the big question is this the Japan set Assassin's Creed we've all been waiting for?
Well, let's see what the critics have to say. You've given me a really cool mix here. We've got everything from like Unfiltered Dose
Yeah.
to some of the big names like IGN and Game Rant, even Fextra Life, The Screen Zone, Eurogamer,
Yeah.
The Gamer, and of course we can't forget the Open Critic score, which gives us a good overall sense of the critical reception.
It's always helpful. It really feels like a big moment for the series, doesn't it?
It does.
They're really trying to find that balance between the classic stealth gameplay that everyone loved in the early games and the big RPG elements that they've been leaning into recently. And doing all of that in feudal Japan. So what's the overall picture here? How are the critics receiving the game so far?
Well, so far it seems to be a pretty big hit.
Oh, yeah.
Assassin's Creed Shadows is sitting at a strong 81 out of 100 on OpenCritic.
That's solid.
And that's based on 141 reviews, so it's a pretty decent sample size. Indicates a lot of critics are really enjoying it.
Definitely something to pay attention to. Some of the headlines I've seen call it like a refreshing realignment. Some even say it's a return to form for the series. What do you think is driving that sentiment?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with that balance we were just talking about. It seems like Shadows is really trying to find that sweet spot between the classic Assassin's Creed stealth and the newer RPG elements. And a lot of critics felt that the more recent games, they went a little too far into that RPG territory.
Yeah, I see.
They kind of lost some of that core stealth identity that made the series so popular in the first place.
Interesting.
And Shadows seems to be course correcting in a way that's really resonating with people.
I gotcha. So how exactly are they doing that? One of the things I keep hearing about is this dual protagonist system. Can you talk about that a bit? What can you tell me about these two main characters, Naoi and Yasuke?
Yeah. It's a really cool concept. So we've got Noe, she's a shinobi, which is basically like a highly trained secret agent.
Okay.
So her whole gameplay is focused on stealth. She's using a grappling hook to get around, going prone to stay hidden. She can even manipulate light and shadow to her advantage. It's super cool. And when she pulls off an assassination,
Yeah.
it's described as like seamless, like guaranteed takedown.
She sounds like the classic Assassin's Creed protagonist, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like back to the roots of the series.
Right. And then on the other hand, we have Yasuke, and he offers a very different experience.
Yeah, tell me about him.
Yasuke is a samurai, so as you might expect, his gameplay is all about combat. He's got specialized armor you can customize and a really parry-heavy fighting style, so he's more of a powerhouse. Not as sneaky as Neo, but if you want to go in guns blazing, he's your guy.
I love that they're giving players the choice, so you can pick who you want to play as based on the situation.
Exactly. And that seems to be adding a lot of strategic depth to the game. Do you want to infiltrate this heavily guarded fortress as Nio, all stealthy and quiet? Or do you want to just storm the place as Yasuke and just overpower everyone? It's up to you.
That's cool. It lets you tailor the experience to your playstyle.
Yeah.
I did see some reviews mention a potential imbalance, though. Like Naya might get more attention in the story.
Yeah. A few critics have pointed out that it seems like Nao might play a bigger role in the main story, and she's definitely involved in more missions. They're both central to the plot, but if you're really drawn to Yasuke's story, he's based on a real historical figure, the only foreign-born samurai to serve Oda Nobunaga.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, and it takes place during the Sengoku era, which lasted from like 1560 to 1582, a super fascinating period in Japanese history. It's a great setting for the game, but Nio might be the one driving the story a little bit more.
Interesting. Okay, so let's get into the actual gameplay a bit more. I heard there have been some big changes to the combat system. This new color-coded parry system sounds pretty intriguing. How does that work?
It's a really cool addition. Basically, when an enemy attacks, there's now a color that tells you what kind of attack it is.
Okay.
White is a standard attack, blue is a special attack, and then red means it's unblockable.
I see.
So you can't just rely on one general parry anymore. You really have to pay attention to what the enemy is doing and react accordingly.
Makes sense.
And it gets even cooler. Yasuke, later in the game, if you get the right gear upgrades, he can actually deflect those red unblockable attacks, so he becomes even more of a beast in combat.
That's awesome. I bet that makes him super powerful in the later parts of the game. What about the weapons? It sounds like they've got a really authentic collection of Japanese weaponry in this one.
Oh yeah, for sure. You've got your katana, which is your standard versatile sword. Then there's the kusarigama, which is like this chain sickle weapon, super cool.
Yeah.
And the kanabu, which is like a big, heavy club for smashing things.
Sounds brutal.
Oh yeah. And there are a bunch of other period-appropriate weapons to find and master.
Nice. And do they all feel unique? Like, is there a reason to experiment with the different weapons?
Oh, absolutely. Each weapon type has its own unique skill tree, so
Yeah.
you can really specialize in how you want to use it. And they all have their own distinct perks and animations.
Well,
So it really encourages you to experiment and find a style that works for you. Game Rant specifically mentioned how the combat system is accessible enough for new players, but it's also got a lot of depth for those who want to master it.
that's great. A good mix for all kinds of players. Okay, so I've talked about combat, but what about the stealth? That's such a core part of the Assassin's Creed experience. From what you've read, does it sound like they've done it justice with Naoe?
Oh, without a doubt. It seems like they've really gone all out on the stealth gameplay for Neo.
Nice.
She can use bamboo to breathe underwater, hide in shadows. She can even manipulate parts of the environment to distract enemies. The Screen Zone even called the stealth systems in Shadows best in class compared to the other recent games.
That's a big compliment.
It is. I always loved those moments in the early games, where you really felt like a predator stalking your prey.
Yeah. You're just a ghost in the shadows.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the gadgets and abilities. The weather system actually plays a big role in stealth, too. For example, if it's raining, your footsteps are masked, so you can use that to your advantage. And even Eagle Vision, which is a classic ability in the series, it's been redesigned. You can't see through walls anymore,
Oh.
which forces you to be a lot more aware of your surroundings and plan your moves carefully.
That's cool. It makes it a lot more challenging. I remember in some of the older games, you could just tag everyone through walls, and it made things a little too easy.
Exactly. This makes it more realistic and immersive. And what's really interesting is they've really leaned into the dynamic seasons. So like in spring, you have all this tall grass that you can hide in. And then in winter, lakes and rivers freeze over, which opens up new paths and ways to approach a situation.
That sounds amazing. It's not just a visual thing. It really affects how you play the game.
Exactly. It's so dynamic.
Let's move on to the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot about how stunning this game looks, especially if you've got the latest hardware.
Oh, yeah. The visuals in this game are apparently incredible,
Yeah.
especially on the PS5 Pro. Eurogamer was really impressed by the ray-traced global illumination, or RTGI.
TGI. Right.
It basically means the lighting is super realistic and it reacts to the environment. And they said it makes a huge difference both in the overall lighting and the level of detail in the foliage. Apparently, the base PS5 version looks a little flat in comparison, so if you have a PS5 Pro, you're in for a real treat.
Wow. It really shows how much of a difference that next-gen hardware can make. And then you've got that dynamic season system, too. Must be pretty awesome to see the world transform as the seasons change.
Oh, it's supposed to be amazing. It goes from like lush greens in spring to these stark, beautiful winter landscapes. And as we've talked about, it's not just a visual thing. It really impacts the gameplay as well, so it affects how you explore the world and approach missions.
So they've really created a living, breathing world.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right, let's talk story. This game is set during the Sengoku period in Japan, and they've even got famous historical figures like Oda Nobunaga making appearances. That's such a rich setting for a story, what do you think?
I totally agree. It's such a fascinating and chaotic period in Japanese history, full of political intrigue and conflict, and having these real historical figures involved just adds another layer of depth and authenticity.
For sure.
The story starts out as a revenge tale, but it sounds like it quickly expands into these larger conspiracies and power struggles that we've come to expect from Assassin's Creed, classic Assassin's Creed stuff.
I like that. So, are the critics enjoying the story so far?
Yeah, for the most part. Fextra Life gave the game a perfect score for its setting, but they did have a couple of minor gripes with some aspects of the story.
Okay.
But overall, there's a lot of praise for those smaller character moments. Like there is a scene where Nayo and Yasuke are playing a drinking game together. Little things like that really flesh them out as characters.
Those little moments are so important, especially in a game with such a huge scope and historical backdrop. It really helps to ground the story and make you care about the characters.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the story is a bit more focused this time around compared to some of the more recent games like Valhalla, which was huge. It's actually being compared favorably to Assassin's Creed Mirage in terms of pacing, so it seems like they're going for a tighter, more engaging narrative experience, with a lot more focus on character development.
I like that. Sometimes those massive, sprawling stories can feel a bit overwhelming,
Ah.
and you lose track of what's going on, so it sounds like they've learned from that. What about the overall length of the game? And how are the missions structured?
It's estimated to be around 40 to 50 hours long,
Okay.
which is definitely shorter than some of the behemoths we've seen lately. Like Valhalla was well over 60 hours. So it seems like they're streamlining things a bit. Even the side content is described as more optional. You can play it if you want to level up your character, but it doesn't feel like you're being forced to do a bunch of busy work just to pad out the game.
Less filler, more killer.
Exactly. It seems like they're really taking that feedback about bloat to heart.
Good to hear. But it's still an open world, right? Like you can explore at your own pace and discover things.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's still a big open world, and as we talked about earlier, those dynamic seasons make exploration even more interesting.
Right.
But some reviewers have mentioned that there can be a bit of repetition in the enemy types and mission objectives. Even with the changing seasons, it might not completely escape some of those open world tropes.
Gotcha. All right. So let's bring it all together. For our listeners out there who are thinking about picking up Assassin's Creed Shadows, what are the main takeaways? What should they be excited about?
Well, if you're someone who loves stealth gameplay and you're fascinated by feudal Japan, then you're going to love this game.
Okay.
It looks absolutely stunning, especially on the newer consoles. And the dual protagonist system with Nayo and Yasuke offers a ton of variety in terms of how you approach the game.
And it sounds like the story is more focused this time around, which is a good thing. What about the downsides? What should people be aware of before they jump in?
Well, some reviewers have mentioned some minor inconsistencies with the story, and there might be a bit of repetition in some of the missions.
Okay.
And it sounds like Nayo might be a bit more central to the story than Yasuke, which could be a bummer if you were really looking forward to playing as him.
So overall, a really strong entry in the series.
Yeah.
But maybe not perfect.
Exactly.
All right. As we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on. We've talked about how this game blends stealth and action, and how the environment plays a big role in how you approach situations. But with those two very different protagonists, how do you think that's going to affect your experience? Do you think having those two distinct playstyles will make you want to replay the game? Maybe try different approaches? Or could it end up feeling disjointed, jumping back and forth between characters who play so differently? It's something to think about as you decide whether to take the plunge into Sengoku-era Japan. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been fun.
Until next time.